The NBA free agency period is mostly wrapped up, and after a busy couple of weeks here in the league, it's time to reassess the landscape here in the NBA, with the Suns trading for Bradley Beal, the defending champs staying pat, the Lakers making a ton of moves, and the Rockets spending a ton of money. It's been an eventful offseason, and I haven't even mentioned that both Damian Lillard and James Harden may both be on the move as well. We're going to talk about that a little bit here on today's show, as well as release my first set of NBA power rankings going into the new season. This is your early reminder to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, just overall support us if you enjoy what you hear, as we're on the road to the next big milestone and we can't get there without you guys. But without further ado, this is the Anomaly Podcast. We have some quick news to cover first. As always, timestamps will be in the description of the video. And without further ado, let's get into some quick news. And we're going to start here with the latest news and rumors around the NBA. As of last night, the Dallas Mavericks acquired Grant Williams in a sign and trade with the Celtics and the San Antonio Spurs. The Mavericks will send out Reggie Bullock and an unprotected first-round pick swap in 2030 to the San Antonio Spurs. They will, of course, also receive Grant Williams, who signed for a 4-year, $54 million contract. It's not a bad deal for a guy, a dirty work guy there like Grant Williams that will fit on any contending team. The Celtics will receive 2 second-round picks and a $6 million trade exception. Dallas will also receive 2 second-round picks from Boston. San Antonio, meanwhile, they just get a salary filler here in Reggie Bullock. I'm not sure what was in it for them, but they have the cap room to take on a guy like that, a veteran presence that can help build their young talent, right? The Mavericks weren't done either, though, as they went out there and they offered Matisse Thybulle, who's a restricted free agent, a 3-year, $33 million deal, and it doesn't look like Portland's going to match that deal, right? They still have 24 hours to match. But as of right now, the Mavericks have had a nice little offseason, right? They re-signed Kyrie, they brought in Seth Curry, and now they might have Grant Williams and Matisse Thybulle on the way as well. So nice little offseason there for Dallas to help out Luka and Kyrie, right? We're going to start here with Damian Lillard, the all-star guard there in Portland, as the Miami Heat are the only team that Damian Lillard wants to play for at this point in time if it is not the Portland Trail Blazers. But Miami would, however, need a third team to facilitate this trade and make it work on both sides. And luckily for them, reports say that there's 5 or 6 teams around the league that are trying to get into this trade, facilitate this trade, and make it work to get a piece of the puzzle to help Dame en route to Miami, to South Beach, right? And moving over to the All-Star guard in the Eastern Conference, James Harden, the last we knew about him was that he was opting into his player option to explore some trade options around the league. And James Harden, the reason why he's doing this was because he was upset with how Philly handled his free agency. As per reports and per a Philly insider, he had to say on the topic was, I think he for sure thought that last summer when he gave up $15 million for the Philadelphia 76ers to bring in PJ Tucker and Daniel House, that James Harden was going to get that money back this summer. As they got closer to free agency, Harden only heard radio silence from the 76ers. That is, concerning for the Sixers to have that image out there, whether if it's a fake report or not. I think it makes a ton of sense why Harden was so upset that he wasn't getting that money back this offseason. But multiple teams around the league are still interested in James Harden because he is James Harden. And this is going to be a big season for Philly, to me, if James Harden is dealt, because Tyrese Maxey, he either recently signed an extension or he has one coming up. Tobias Harris, he is on the last year of his deal. Joel Embiid, if they can't bring in a co-star, will he grow upset with the organization and eventually want his way out after next year if they fail to bring in good pieces in that James Harden trade? It's going to be a big season for Philly because I think the process maybe could finally be over after next year if Joel Embiid wants out of Philly. Moving over just to the general NBA news, the Orlando Magic, they waived Bol Bol, who can be claimed on waivers by any team for a small price of $2 million. The move kind of came out of nowhere, but, hey, Bol Bol just is not going to... I think it came down to Orlando just wanting to put minutes elsewhere. Anthony Edwards, who recently signed a 5-year extension with the Minnesota Timberwolves, he won't be a free agent until 2029, as there was no player option on his extension, which is surprising. You never see that nowadays. I'm wondering why Ant did that. Maybe he's that committed to the city of Minnesota. Giannis, he underwent a knee cleanup this offseason. Now, he will miss the World Cup here in a couple weeks, but he will be ready for the 2023 season. PJ Washington, he isn't getting the financial interest around the league, quite like Grant Williams, and he will most likely return to Charlotte on a qualifying offer, which would make him a free agent next offseason. It's a shame because PJ Washington, as of right now, I believe is mostly known for his off-the-court issues compared to his on-the-court production, right? But in non-player news, the NBA has released some more details on the new in-season tournament that will have its debut this year. The final 4 teams in that in-season tournament will play in Las Vegas on December 9th and on December 7th and December 9th, The stats accumulated by the players in this regular season tournament will count towards the regular season, right, except for the championship game. So there was questions on if the stats would matter or if they would count towards the record books. Apparently they will, just not the championship game because there will be other incentives to play that game. There's going to be more information coming Saturday, so I'm still going to be interested to see this year if any of the veterans will really suit up and play in this tournament, as it's, the incentives for these veterans aren't as sought after as far as the young guys who are just trying to get there and get as much money as possible early on in their careers. But that's going to do it for the news around the NBA, as we're going to move over now to the criteria here, as we're going to talk about the NBA power rankings, right? And the criteria were simple. We have 5 tiers, which are, we're going to have the bottom of the barrel tier, which is going to be the bottom 4 teams. We're going to have the no man's land or / rebuilding tier, which is going to contain 6 teams. We're going to have the play-in teams for each conference, which 4 and 4. So we're going to have 8 total teams in that tier. We're going to have teams that are good playoff teams, right? But in other words, are a move away or a year away, right? And that's going to contain 5 teams. And then finally, our 5th tier is going to be our title contenders. It's going to contain 7 teams, and in that thing, just like my NFL Power Rankings video, it's going to have percentages as well as next to the teams, right? And that is basically out of 100% how likely they are to win the title next season as of right now. My number 2 thing is, right now I'm assuming Damian Lillard will be in Miami. The rumored trade package right now is Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, Jamie Jaquez Jr., a 2026 first, and 3 other first-round pick swaps. So I'm only assuming Damian Lillard will be in Miami, and no third team would be involved, strictly for this video. The third thing is that James Harden will stay in Philadelphia because there is multiple teams interested, but for this video, there's not a clear front runner, so I'm going to say he sticks in Philly and tries to work it out with Joel Embiid there to finish what they started as of 2 years ago. But moving over to our tiers, we're going to start here at the bottom of the barrel, as if you are wondering, we are going to go through every single tier. We're going to talk about every single team, so stay tuned, as your team's going to be talked about sooner rather than later. But Washington, the new regime finally came in and they helped this team commit to a rebuild. They traded away Bradley Beal. They traded away Kristaps Porzingis, eventually Chris Paul, as he was only there for about 24 hours. They signed Jordan Poole to an extension. They brought in Kyle Kuzma off an extension. They also signed Danilo Gallinari and drafted one of the biggest wonders in the draft here with Bilal Koulibaly, a French guy that played as a teammate of Victor Wembanyama. This team is in full rebuild mode with plenty of assets, and I think they're right where they should be here as far as their rebuild. And I mean, hey, Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma, this team might have 2 25-point scorers on their team next season with how much opportunity is there in that offense. But for their sake, hopefully that's not enough to push them over the top and win a ton of games to take them out of the sweepstakes for the next big star. The same with Charlotte, right? Charlotte, as they, will passing on Scoot Henderson at number 2 be the biggest mistake since trading Kobe Bryant? That is going to be the question hanging over this franchise for the next decade, right? As we have to see Brandon Miller and how he'll turn out. We know he's had a couple struggles there in the summer league, but again, don't overreact. It's the summer league, right? But LaMelo, I mean, he should be back and hopefully healthy. Same with Gordon Hayward. I mean, Miles Bridges is going to be back as well, so it's going to be good to see his NBA return. But also, I mean, they might also bring back Kelly Oubre, PJ Washington. So there's going to be a ton of solid pieces on this roster. but can they put it all together, right? And how good will Brandon Miller be? That's going to be the biggest two questions this year. As are they going to regret the Brandon Miller selection this year? Hopefully not. Hopefully they see promise, and in 10 years we're going to be like, that was an okay selection. Moving over to the bottom of the barrel in the Western Conference, as the San Antonio Spurs make the list for me, as how many wins will Wemby be worth in his first year, right? Can he get this team to 30, 35 wins? Hopefully not, strictly for their sake, as they could be in the running next year for another star and to continue to build this young core up through the draft. But to me, this is still a very young and raw roster with tons of potential. But with Wemby there now, some are saying he's the greatest prospect ever over LeBron James. So I think with him being there, there's going to be extra eyes there in San Antonio and maybe some added pressure to win and see some success early on. Regardless, I still see a bottom 4 to 5 finish for this young roster, and hopefully they could be in the sweepstakes for another star here in next year's draft. For Portland, I think Dame, if Dame is still on the team, this team is not in this tier, obviously. But we're going to say he's going to be traded. So Dame and the organization, they both go their own ways, and they're both going in a direction I think helps both sides, as Portland can finally commit to this rebuild, and they can now build around their number 3 overall pick in Scoot Henderson, as well as their young guy in Shaedon Sharpe. This is a team that is also going to get plenty of draft capital for Dame here in this trade. So I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, and Yusuf Nurkic are pieces that are going to be moved here in the next season or so they can continue to build around this young core. Regardless, nice young roster, and they're going to be back in playoff contention, I think, faster than most people think as of right now. But moving over to no man's land / the rebuilding tier, as these are teams that are just, in no man's land, or they are rebuilding, quite literally. But we're going to start with Detroit, as I really wanted to squeeze them into a playoff spot. I really did. I wanted to have them be in a play-in spot and make some crazy things happen. But regardless, this team should still be very fun to watch this year if Cade Cunningham can stay healthy. And we're going to get a full year of the James Wiseman, Jalen Durant front court. And that's going to be a fun duo to watch there in the front court. And we're also going to get our first glance of Asar Thompson. Where is he going to fit in the rotation and in the starting lineup? How much opportunity is he going to get under first-year head coach Monty Williams with the Detroit Pistons? There is promise here with this young team, but they just might be a year away here, especially under the tutelage of Monty Williams. The Toronto Raptors here, I think, there is definitely a downgrade going from Fred VanVleet to Dennis Schroeder at the point guard position. And the Raptors didn't really do anything of note here to improve a roster that was 500 last year. It is going to be fun seeing the Point Scotty role here for Scotty Barnes. But under a new head coach, to me, it might just take a year or two for this team to return to the playoff scene. And they still have a lot to figure out with the future of Pascal Siakam. Chicago, they underachieved a lot last season as they were a playoff team. 2 years ago, they were at one point the number 1 seed, and everything's just gone downhill since the injuries of Lonzo Ball and the absence of Lonzo Ball. But the roster still has the same core, right, of Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic. They brought in Javon Carter, which should help out the point guard position a lot in the absence, again, of Lonzo Ball, as his career might be in jeopardy. They also added Torrey Craig, who's going to add some depth to this rotation, who is especially thin at the forward position. It's shaping up to be another underwhelming season in the Windy City. But I'd still like to see some more improvement from Patrick Williams. I'd like to see them pick a direction after next year, whether if that's committing to Zach LaVine and this core, or to just trade one of them, right? Or to trade both of them and commit to a rebuild, just like a team like the Wizards did this offseason. And we're going to kick it over here to the Western Conference with the Minnesota Timberwolves, as the Rudy Gobert mega deal they made last offseason might be the worst trade in NBA history, but we've talked about that a lot here on the podcast. But aside from Rudy Gobert, this team had other issues last year, as Karl-Anthony Towns wasn't healthy. He only played in 29 games, and the Wolves could only do their best to, be around that 500 range when he was down. But they still made the play-in, they still made the playoffs, and took a game off of the champs in the Denver Nuggets. But I think going into next year, a full year of Karl-Anthony Towns, hopefully, and Rudy Gobert should boost this team's success and image going forward, maybe making that trade not look as bad as it currently looks. But Anthony Edwards should continue to take another step in becoming one of the best players in the league, making this his team. However, if everyone is at full health, I just favor other teams going forward as I make these lists based off of full health, right? So we're assuming the teams ahead of them will be fully healthy in all their stars, so I'm not predicting injuries. So as of right now, I prefer other teams ahead of them, and I see them barely missing the playoffs with a very talented team. And there's actually a positive image of this team after next season. Utah, I think the Jazz, they got off to a hot start last season and exceeded a lot of people's expectations. At one point, I think after the first month or so, they were the 1 seed in the NBA, which was absolutely a crazy time to be. You just had to be there, right? But after getting rid of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, a lot of people expected this team to tank and be in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. But they did anything but that. Lauri Markkanen came over, and he won the Most Improved Player. Walker Kessler was a top 3 Rookie of the Year. This offseason, they went out there and traded for a guy like John Collins for nothing, right? So he's going to be a great addition to the squad. I think he can untap some of his potential, but there's still plenty of holes in this roster. They're missing really a point guard on this team, but they're going to be solid yet again. I think they barely missed the playoffs or the play-in like they did last year, but still very solid. I think we see a lot of potential from John Collins. And finishing off with the Houston Rockets, as this team had a very busy offseason, as we mentioned in the intro. They paid Fred VanVleet $40 million. They gave Dylan Brooks $20 million a season, right? So a lot of money was spent out on just those 2 players. But they also signed a guy like Jeff Green. They drafted Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore. Maybe they had the best overall draft around the league, excuse me. But they did a little bit of everything, right? They got their veteran vocal leaders that can help them win now, as well as help their young core develop and grow. But this is a better overall roster than last year. There's no doubt about it. And I believe it should be one of the most fun rosters to watch in the NBA. But how the minutes shake out is anyone's guess. To me, they barely missed the play-in. Again, I'm assuming everyone is at full health. If some injuries happen and Fred VanVleet can kick back to his 2019 version, maybe this team can sneak into the play-in, right? Anything can happen. But moving over to the play-in teams, as in the Eastern Conference, we're going to start here with the New York Knicks, as they played great basketball last season. They got an all-star caliber year from Jalen Brunson, who kind of shot out of nowhere, and they got improved play from Julius Randle. Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes are also nice pieces off the bench that stepped up. Also, RJ Barrett, he played a nice complementary role on offense. This team went out there this offseason. They're trying to recreate that championship Villanova team from a couple years ago, as they brought in Dante DiVincenzo. They re-signed Josh Hart. The only person they're missing from that Villanova core is Mikal Bridges, and unfortunately, I think he might be untouchable at the moment for the Brooklyn Nets. However, my worries with this New York Knicks team comes with the inconsistency of their coach in Tom Thibodeau and their star Julius Randle. As Julius Randle, he's had a tendency over his entire career to have a really good year, then just have an okay year, then be back to All-NBA to barely an All-Star. No joke, that has been his entire career back from the Lakers to now. He has been, a very wishy-washy, right? A very, boom or bust is a way to put it. And if history tells us anything, this is going to be an off year for Julius Randle, which can only mean bad things here for the New York Knicks team. But for Tom Thibodeau's sake, he has also had that same tendency in his career to start off really good with teams, as in his head coaching career, he has started off having a couple really good years at the start of his tenure, and then as time goes on, he starts to fall off and he starts to plateau as just a kind of a mediocrity coach. And, he did it in Chicago, he did it in Minnesota. History would tell us this would be the year it starts here in New York. So my concerns are really things that are just on paper and are just numbers. But to me, it's still, if history tells us anything, New York might have a down year, right, is basically the point I'm getting at. But still a really good team. They could still have the potential to win a play-in and win a first-round series. Still a very tough and gritty team, but I worry about them as far as the regular season. For Atlanta, they fell short of expectations last year. They traded for DeJounte Murray to basically complement Trae Young in every way that he is not on a basketball court. But they went 500. They were squeaking into the postseason, through the play-in even, right? And this team this offseason went out there and made basically no changes to this team. Aside from trading away John Collins for Rudy Gay and a second-round pick, and that's basically nothing for a guy like John Collins. So it's hard to envision this team improving much in 2023 and 2024, but they still have Trae Young, they still have DeJounte Murray. I think Quinn Snyder comes into this team, and he gives them an overall boost, right? Which is why I could see them still being like a 7-8 seed, but they might be a way better 7-8 seed than they were last year. The Orlando Magic, I am really confident in this team. If a team I think can go from not making the playoffs to being a top 6 seed, I think I'm more confident in Orlando than a lot of other teams, right? I think I have one more team ahead of them. But this Magic team, I mean, they were really competent last season as they got off to a rocky start, if I can remember correctly. And then I think this team was like 21-24 over its last 45 games, a random stat that I remembered. But they were an overall top 10 defensive team. They had the Rookie of the Year in Paolo Banchero, who he really shined, and he's still going to take leaps and bounds in his game going forward. But the Magic, I mean, they can compete for a spot in the playoffs this season. You know, if the young core of Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter, they still have Jalen Suggs, Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony. This team has tons of talent, you know, and they just went out there and they drafted Anthony Black out of Arkansas. It's going to be a fun season on Orlando and to really see if they can take that next jump like a team like the Memphis Grizzlies did a couple years ago, as they had a ton of young talent and they just put it all together in one season to take that jump, to take them to the playoffs. It's going to be interesting to see if they can have that similar jump here in Orlando. I think they can. The Brooklyn Nets, I mean, last year was kind of a roller coaster ride for them and Nets fans in general, right? As they went from having Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and title hopes. Then a trade deadline came around, they traded both of their top stars, and now they're back in the rebuilding phase that they were just 5 years ago. But luckily for them, Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, they were both acquired at the midseason mark last year, and they are very quality options going forward. They still have Nick Claxton, right, who took a step forward last year. They still have Ben Simmons, who has been in the lab, in Photoshop too, but he's been in the lab, and you know, maybe he can finally gain some confidence this offseason and get back to the Ben Simmons that we all knew just a few years ago. But the Nets, I mean, they're one of the most interesting teams to watch in 2023, but I can't see anything further than a play-in spot this year, as I think they were kind of gifted a play-off spot last year due to the start of the season from Kyrie and Kevin Durant. But moving over to the Western Conference, and again, this is assuming that everyone is going to stay healthy, as I don't predict injuries here in these videos. But the Los Angeles Clippers, I mean, they had stretches last season without Kawhi Leonard and or Paul George. I know, right? That's a shocker, all right? But they did stay competitive with one of the best coaches in the game. In Ty Lue, he might be the best coach in the NBA right now. But they brought back everybody, right? They brought back everybody. And it has been the same question every year with the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George duo. In this era, can they both stay on the court? Can they both be healthy? And can they both be healthy at the right time to win a championship? But we've seen nothing of this duo, aside from their first year in the bubble, that makes us believe that they can both do that at the right time. I think it's still a huge year in LA for this duo and for this core, as they might both be traded here after next year, which will be interesting to see the value of guys like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. But, I mean, if they're healthy and they can put it all together, they brought Russ back, I think they'll be a bona fide play-in team, but I think they'll be the number 7 seed here in the play-in tournament. But for Dallas, I think this is a team that's led by Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. I mean, you're always going to be in the playoff mix if you have that core or that top duo, right? But just like any other year, the West is really stacked and it's really tough, which is, to me, why they're going to be like the 8th seed here this year. But, I mean, hey, they have the superstars. You know, can they coexist? Can they both stay healthy, just like the Clippers? And do they have enough help around them? I mean, they just brought in Grant Williams. They might bring in Matisse Thybulle as well to pair along their 2 stars. There's a ton of questions to answer with this team, right, as far as health, right? But they have the star power, and I think Luka comes into this year with a chip on his shoulder, just like a guy I'm going to talk about later. And I think he's going to be in the MVP running. I don't think Luka will win it due to how this team is constructed. But I think Luka's going to come into this year with a chip on his shoulder, and we're going to get some special basketball from number 77. The Pelicans, to me, one of the most talented starting 5s in the league. But the offseason drama with Zion and his off-the-court antics, as well as his lack of availability through his small career, is concerning, to say the least, right? Zion, I mean, he has all the potential in the world, but he can't stay on the court. He only plays like 25% of his games. But when Zion and Brandon Ingram were healthy last year, I mean, there was a stretch where this team was the number one team in the Western Conference, and I believe number one seed in the league, if I'm not mistaken. But they have two guys that are perennial all-stars with a very good supporting cast, and their whole team has the potential to be a lot better aside from C.J. McCollum. I mean, they have everything as well as a very underrated coach, but can they stay healthy enough to be a dominant team and be the team that we all think they can be going forward? That's the question, and that's going to be the big question they're going to have to answer as long as Zion and Brandon Ingram are on this team, as they have health issues, right? But the Oklahoma City Thunder, I mean, the Thunder nearly snuck into the playoffs last year, as Shea had a great year, averaging like 35-5, and they also had a very great year from their rookie in Jalen Williams. They're going to get Chet Holmgren back this year after missing last year, and he's looked okay there in the Summer League so far. Not great, but he's still getting his feet back under him. I will believe that this team is going to get a much-needed boost from Chet Holmgren this year, and I expect the Thunder to take a step forward, as they're all very young. I think they were the youngest roster in basketball last year, so they still have potential. They can still grow, and if they can make the play-in yet again, I think it's still a very successful year for them, being the youngest roster in basketball. But, I mean, hey, it's tough to see a team go from 10-10, right? And you're saying, how is that improvement? How is sneaking into the play-in 2 years in a row improvement? To me, it's just, man, again, this is assuming everyone's healthy, and the West is just so stacked that I think even if they could just make the play-in, it is going to be a successful year, assuming everyone is healthy. Moving over to the good playoff teams / a move / a trade away, basically. As we're going to start here with the Cavs, as a Cavs fan, we made the playoffs without LeBron James last year. We won 50 games without LeBron last year, and those were both things that we did for the first time in over 20 years, right? But the season ended in crushing fashion. I mean, we had a very poor playoff series there against the New York Knicks, but we still brought back the same core, right? So we're going to have continuity again this year, and I think we went out there, we did fill a void, right? We did bring in Max Strus and Georges Niang, and I mean, we're still going to have Donovan Mitchell, which regardless of his future, right now he's in Cleveland, and he's coming off of the best season of his career, right? Him and Darius Garland, I mean, they've worked together from day one, and they've really meshed on the court from day one. I'm expecting this Cleveland team to come back out this year, win 48 to 55 games, and hopefully step it up in the playoffs. You know, next year I think my hope is to make the Eastern Conference Finals, as I don't expect this team to be a title contender, but man, let's make it interesting, right? Let's win a playoff series or two. I expect some improvement from Evan Mobley. I expect bigger playoff performances from Jarrett Allen in this core going forward. I just hope that our shooters can shoot and our stars can be stars, as we still have questions about the coaching staff here in Cleveland, but I think we can all put it together to be a very competent team in 2023. For Philadelphia, I think they finished as the 4 seed. As of now, James Harden hasn't requested a trade yet, right? But I'm going to account for him to be a 76er going into next year, as he will most likely be traded. But as of right now, there's not a front runner, right? So I'm going to say he sticks in Philly. And if that is the case, I mean, he and the reigning MVP in Joel Embiid, they should be able to lead this team to a plenty of regular season wins like they did last year. And, they might fall short in the playoffs yet again, just like they do every year, but that is not my concern as of right now. As right now, I think they're going to be the 4 seed. They're going to have home court advantage, and I believe, if they didn't run into Jason Tatum last year, right, and if Jason Tatum didn't drop 51 points in a Game 7, maybe they make the finals, right? You can make the argument that if they matched up against the Heat, they would have been able to handle that, and they would have been able to make the finals, and then we look at this team in a completely different light. But they didn't, and they lost in Game 7, and now we're sitting here with tons of questions, as it's a big year in Philly as far as the future of their stars. And finally, Indiana. I know, right? Indiana, right? But to me, they're going to make the playoffs next year, and they're going to be at least the 6th seed next season. Before Tyrese Halliburton's injury, the Pacers were headed to the playoffs. I mean, at one point, they were the 3 seed, a game and a half back from the number 1 seed. This team went out this offseason. They signed Bruce Brown, which is going to be a huge addition for this team going forward. He's a nice playmaker, defender. He's going to take the toughest assignments, as well as hit the 3 when need be, right? But this team also went out there and they traded for Obi Toppin, who has plenty of untapped potential going forward. They drafted one of my favorite rookies in the class in Jarris Walker, who can make an immediate impact in my mind. And if he can, I think the Pacers are going to be a formidable team. I think this team has plenty of depth, plenty of star power, and I think they're going to be a top 6 seed in the East next season. Call me crazy, I know. But moving over to the Western Conference side of things, again, these are teams that are just a year away, or they're just good playoff teams at the end of the day. But Memphis, I mean, they're going to lose Ja Morant, one of the best young guards we have in the league, for the first 25 games of the season. But good news for the Memphis Grizzlies is that over the last 2 years when Ja has missed time due to injury or suspension, whatever the case may have been, they have had a really good record without Ja Morant over the last 2 years. I think they're like 21-10 without their best player, which is crazy, but that just shows how deep this Memphis Grizzlies team is. But they went out there and they traded for former Defensive Player of the Year in Marcus Smart, who can temporarily fill the void of Ja Morant at point guard, but when Ja returns, this is a team that's going to have a top 5 point guard in the NBA. They're going to have the last 2 Defensive Player of the Years, one on the perimeter and one on the inside. That is Marcus Smart on the perimeter and Jaren Jackson on the inside. So they're going to have the last 2 Defensive Player of the Years. They're going to have shooting. They're going to have a top 5 point guard returning, a very solid big in Steven Adams. I mean, this team is going to shoot up the rankings when Ja Morant returns, and they're going to be a dangerous playoff team like they have been the last 2 seasons. And not to mention, I think one of the most underrated signings this offseason was the addition of Derrick Rose to this Memphis team, right? As I believe he comes in, he adds a veteran presence to this locker room for all this young talent, but he's also going to be a good mentor there for Ja Morant as they play very similar, and I think Derrick Rose can do only good for Ja Morant in that locker room going forward. But for Sacramento, they're my other team, as I love their offseason from the Kings, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The age-old saying. But the Kings, they ended their 16-year playoff drought last year thanks to all-star seasons from Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. And not to mention, I mean, they drafted Keegan Murray, one of the older rookies last year, but he had a very solid year last year as he broke the record for the most three-pointers made by a rookie in a single season. And he's going to come back and he's only going to improve as he's looked dominant there in the summer league. But they also, Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, they are also returning and they add valuable shooting. They re-signed their vet in Harrison Barnes. I think, just bring the team back, run it back again, and prove to the league that last year wasn't a fluke. So those are my teams that are going to be in the playoffs, but they are just not title contenders as we look at those 7 teams now. The final 7. If you're still a fan of this team, drop a like as if your team is still remaining on this list. But moving over to the title contenders, we have the Miami Heat and the Golden State Warriors at the 5% chance to win the title next season, as well as you see Boston with a 15% chance. But let's start with Miami, as this is assuming, again, that Damian Lillard will be on the roster and that Tyler Hero will not be. Right, so this team would have Damian Lillard, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, with maybe the best coach in the game, maybe the best developmental system in the game, as well as maybe the best culture in the game, right? So this team has a lot of the best, right, quite literally. But not to mention, I mean, even if they trade Tyler Hero in that package we said earlier, they're still going to have Kevin Love, Caleb Martin, Duncan Robinson, Nikola Jovic, right? These are all guys that could be viable options off the bench or even in the starting lineup. I mean, I believe Dame gives this team exactly what they need, as Jimmy Butler and Bam aren't regular season players. Damian Lillard can come in, and he might find himself in the MVP conversation. I think he can average basically 30 points in this offense, as crazy as that might sound. But history tells us out of any time these new big threes are formed, that they typically need a year or two to mesh, right? They typically need a year or two to put it all together and win at a high level. But we're going to have to see. Maybe Damian comes in, and he doesn't need that year there in Miami. For Golden State, I give them 5% chance as well because we get 3 more years. 3 more years, that is what we have left of this Warriors core, and it might be the best big 3 of all time in the history of the NBA. I mean, this team went out there, they traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul, which I believe Chris Paul also gives them a different element offensively. It'll be interesting to see if he's in the rotation, since he doesn't typically play off the ball a lot. It'll be interesting to see if he's in the closing lineups or if he starts next to Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. Very interesting, but regardless of however that works, they still have the trio of Steph, Klay, and Dre, and as long as you have that trio, you will be a contender in my eyes because there's nothing like their chemistry, there's nothing like the Warriors' scheme and their system, And Steve Kerr, I mean, he's a very underrated coach as he's always been. But, I mean, this team has everything to win at a high level yet again. But can they put it all together come playoff time? For Boston, this is a different team heading into next season, and this is why I give them a 10% extra percentage of the last two teams combined. But to me, Marcus Smart is gone. Yes, sure, right? You lost your heart and soul, but you still have Derek White. I think Derek White can come in and step in and take his place and still play that role of a Marcus Smart. And they also traded for a perennial all-star and Kristaps Porzingis, who can be an elite two-way stretch four, But to me, Boston, I mean, you have Jaylen Brown, you have Jason Tatum, two guys that are squarely in their prime, only getting better. And then you bring in Kristaps Porzingis. You still have Al Horford, Derek White, solid pieces off this bench. This team just needs the cards to fall in their direction, right? In their favor come playoff time to bring home a championship. As I believe, last year they should have beaten the Heat, right, in that Eastern Conference Finals. But can they just put it all together? Can Jaylen Brown come back and fix what his issues were last year, his left hand? I think he can. I think there's nothing to worry about for this Boston team as they've only gotten better this offseason. Moving over to the next two teams, as these two teams also have the same percentage as Boston to win the title next year at 15%. But we'll start with Phoenix, as they had an injury-plagued year last year. I think a lot of people forget that, which led to them being the 4 seed, and they had a second-round matchup against the eventual champion Denver Nuggets, which, by the way, the Phoenix Suns undermanned, right? They were missing their all-star guard and Chris Paul. They still took 2 games off of the Denver Nuggets, which no other team could do here in the postseason. So we have to remember that going forward. But this new ownership has been wheeling and dealing, and let's just say they've left their mark. They came in, they traded for Kevin Durant at the deadline last year, which is no small task. I mean, it's Kevin Durant, one of the all-time greats this game has ever seen. And then they go out in this offseason, and they say that's not enough. Let's go trade for an all-star and Bradley Beal, right? And they've also had, with bringing in Bradley Beal, they have 4 players now making $30+ million on the roster. And with their limited money, they've still done a pretty good job of going out there and building a pretty deep roster, right? So they look primed to be dominant in the league next year. To me, I'm just worried about, with it being the first year with this new Big Three. Like I mentioned with the Heat, history tells us these Big Threes typically need a year or two to mesh and win at a high level, right? But I could be overthinking this one. I could be thinking too much, as this Suns team really has just that much talent to win no matter what statistic you want to throw out there. And the Lakers, to me, also have a 15% chance, as you could argue that no other team had a better offseason than the Los Angeles Lakers. They re-signed Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, and D'Angelo Russell. We talked about this already on on Tuesday's podcast. But to me, I mean, if that is your offseason as a Lakers fan, I think you're content, right? You brought back your 3 guys. But then they also brought in Gabe Vincent, Cam Reddish, Taurean Prince, Jackson Hayes. This team looks primed to help LeBron win his 5th ring and close out his career in LA, as this is most likely LeBron's last year in LA, as crazy as that might sound. But it's crazy to think that where this team was a year ago to now, right? As they were, we were like, Russell Westbrook, maybe they can figure it out in year 2, to now it's, the Lakers are actually back in contention tier, and they might win another championship. But shout out to Rob Pelinka in that front office, as they've done an amazing job building around their roster, or building around their stars and LeBron and Anthony Davis. But again, this might be LeBron's last year in Los Angeles before he goes to team up with his son next year, right? But moving over to the top 2 teams, to me, a 20% chance to win the title next year is the Denver Nuggets. As, yes, they are the defending champs. They're going to be looking to defend their crown. There's nothing like playing in Mile High, right? In the NFL and the NBA, doesn't matter. There's nothing like playing in Mile High. But this team did lose Bruce Brown, but I will say, I don't think that void is going to be missed a whole lot, as Christian Braun showed a lot of promise last year, and I think he can step up and play that role for Bruce Brown, right? But if you have Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., this team is going to be a contender, and I think they're going to be right there back for back-to-back titles. They're going to be in that conversation. To me, the edge out a couple other Western Conference teams in the Lakers, Warriors, and Phoenix Suns as of right now. And to close off, to me, a team that has 25% chance to win the title next year, the highest percent chance that I've given out, and I think this is a team that I had winning last year, but it's the Milwaukee Bucks, right? And they didn't have a crazy offseason, right? They did what they needed to do. They brought back Chris Middleton. They brought back Brook Lopez. They signed Malik Beasley, and, he's going to provide some outside shooting for this team going forward. But the way this team lost last season was brutal, right? They were one of the few 1 seeds to ever lose to an 8 seed. But I believe they're going to be back, and they're going to be ready for another run. Giannis got his knee cleaned up, so he's going to be back to 100% next year. And I may be in the minority with this prediction, right? As I do have them as my favorites. I don't believe a lot of people will. But it's a big year for Giannis, and I think he comes into this year with a chip on his shoulder like Luka. And I think Giannis will win this title for the Milwaukee Bucks. As of right now, that is my prediction. Right before the season, I'm going to do this video again, and maybe I change my mind. But as of right now, Milwaukee is going to be my title favorite for 2023. But moving over, if you want the numbers, again, don't look at these numbers too, closely. But here you go, as you see, Milwaukee and Denver top my list, and then you have Charlotte and Washington closing the list. But I'm going to post this over on Instagram, as if you're not following us over there, go ahead and follow us, as that is our list. Take a look at it. And I'm going to post it on Instagram, so if you want to look at it further, it will be there as well. But that's going to do it for today's show, as it was a longer show here, as we haven't really had a long episode like this since Bakari left. But he might be back next week, as be on the lookout for something like that. But regardless, another great episode in the books. We'll see you guys tomorrow for a mock draft, as I'm going to set up the actual league settings of a real league that I'm in, a money league, and I want to do a couple mock drafts here to get in the groove for that league coming up here in a couple months. But that's going to do it for today's show. Another great week in the books. If you guys enjoyed what you saw or listened to, support us down below. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. It's around the road to 500 subs, and that's the next big milestone for us here on the channel. But without further ado, we'll see you guys tomorrow for the mock draft. Have a great weekend if you don't see us tomorrow. And we'll see you guys next week for another great week and another week of rankings. Stay happy, stay healthy. We're out.